around convincing the Western world that, hey, you know what, we can do the things cheaper that you guys can do. You can do that at one-fifth the cost, and things are possible. People can actually sit across the ocean. They can dial in remotely through lease line. The same code can actually be seen on this side of the world as well as the other side of the world. So pretty much the first few years of Indian IT industry when we went global was spent in convincing the world about how the or the offshoring model is going to work. So that kept happening for major part of 90s. When the Y2K problem happened, that's when the Indian IT companies came up with a solution for Y2K. That's when it was realized by the Western world that, hey, you know what, these guys can actually do some meaningful work as well, much beyond the typical perception of providing cheap bodies. So post Y2K, we started getting much meaningful work from the Western world. After that, we kept building on that, but then the biggest concern was the organizations were not very willing to offshore their key applications. So they would want to have the backend work, they would want to have the non-core work offshore to India, but they would still want to have the main work stationed in their geography on their premise somewhere in the Western world. Then 2008 happened. When 2008 happened, again there was a lot of pressure on the organizations to cut on the cost. And whenever the cost cutting becomes a priority, anything and everything radical is generally explode. So at that point of time, the organization said, hey, you know what, we have been trusting these guys with applications that they have been managing from offshore. We even trust them for our core applications, but for that we get the guys on site. Now this is something that has been proven. Now we want to actually evolve. So what next can be done? So that's when came the concept of ODCs, Offshore Development Center, or CAPTs as they call it. So that's when majority of the banks, the UBS of the world, the Wells Fargo's, Bank of America, and they started investing in India. So that's when the Indian IT industry actually shifted from pure play offshore to basically a, an industry which had presence of the Western world within India as well. So that model kept working for a while, wherein they kept the core application within their premises, but that was again based in India. Then over a period of time, they realized their core competency is not running offshore centers, and they said, hey, you know what, this is not something that's working out, and they started exiting. So someone sold it to Cognizant, somebody sold it to Wipro with long-term contract, saying that, okay, for next 5 years or 10 years, you have my contract and you manage this ODC, I'm moving out. Then towards this 2017, 2018 and all, organizations realized, you know what, beyond the typical on-site, offshore and all this model, there's much more that needs to be done. And even the Indian IT industry realized we have been doing same bespoke work for clients across globe. Now we got to be standardizing that. Now, what does standardization means in this aspect? Over a period of time, obviously our quality, our delivery was standardized, but we were still doing similar work for a lot many clients. So that's when the industry started moving towards productization. They said, hey, you know what? This is something that we have done for client A. Now client B is going to come. I'm not going to start from scratch. And let's work in a model wherein the IP is either owned by me or IP is jointly owned. And basically, we end up productizing this so that the next client who comes on board, it becomes easier for them to get the product. Plus, they get the confidence that, okay, there are others who are already using it. Plus, from the IT company perspective as well, it's much lesser effort that's needed to go and serve a client. So that's how the Indian IT industry evolved. So in the last few years, there was a huge shift towards productization of the offering. So 10, 15 years back, you wouldn't find guys who would say, hey, I work with an Indian IT company and I'm a product manager. That was not the case because Indian IT industries were not focusing on products per se. Obviously, there were a few like Microsoft and all which had offices in India and which were making products. But in general, you wouldn't find a lot of product managers in it working out of India. So that's how the industry evolved. Now, over a period of time, as the industry evolved and people started moving into this, obviously, when you start something new, you need people who need to come and do that, and you might not have people with relevant experience, and that's exactly what happened with the Indian IT industry as well. So we didn't have people who had product management experience per se. So we started getting people from other sides, people who were business analysts, people who had been domain guys, people who had been program managers. So various combinations were tried. And then that's how if you see product managers, if you just double click on their LinkedIn profile, someone who has been in industry for last 10, 15 years, probably majority of them would have not started as a product manager per se. They would have transitioned into that role at some point of time. Now, the reason I weaved all this story is I just wanted to give you a context that how the product management landscape has evolved, and why I brought this up is I'm, I'm myself a person who has played multiple roles over a period of time before getting into product. Now, was it something good or was it something bad? That's debatable, but personally, I feel that is something that's very, very helpful. Reason being, if you have played multiple roles, you can very well understand what's going in the other person's head and what are the challenges the other person is going to feel or face when they are dealing with your product. If you have been into sales, you would realize if the sales guy has to go and sell your product, typically what are the challenges he is going to face. If you are someone who has been into account management, you would realize, okay, typically what are the challenges the account managers face when they have to go and sell a product. So having played multiple roles and then transitioning into product management is something that works well. Now that's one bit of it. Now let's talk about typically what is that's needed to become a product manager. So typically for becoming a product manager, there are a few key things that are needed, and typically you can put them in four different buckets. One of them is domain knowledge. So in case you're talking about product which is highly domain centric, you're working for a bank, you're working for an insurance company, you're working for anything which requires substantial domain knowledge, you want to become a product manager in that area, it's good to have the domain knowledge, because unless you understand that, you cannot really visualize how the entire landscape fits in and how your product is going to basically make things better in the entire scheme of things. So domain knowledge obviously is one thing. With that said, now people are moving from becoming like a domain centric individual to a T-shaped professional, wherein people have a bit of knowledge on everything and a and substantial knowledge on one thing. So you basically end up creating a T wherein you have small knowledge on everything and like mild deep knowledge on one particular stuff. So my recommendation is, if you are looking into making a career in any stream, be it product management, be it anything else, consider being a T-shaped professional rather than being someone who knows only, or an I-shaped professional as it's called, a person who knows only one domain. So that's one thing. Once the domain knowledge part is sorted, depending upon what kind of product you're working on, if you're working on something which is more like, let's assume it's Facebook. So you probably don't really need to have a domain knowledge for that. But if you're working for an insurance product, you need to have domain knowledge. So that what I said is again subjective depending upon what kind of product you're picking up. Is it a B2B product? Is it a B2C product? Is it a B2B2C product? And things like that. Now, once domain part is sorted, the next thing that's needed in a product manager is obviously the product management and product marketing skills. Now, what happens is I saw majority of you guys, like I believe 2/3 of the batch, a little over 2/3, has some work experience, right? Now, all of you, since you have work experience, that means you had a job, and unfortunately, you are not happy with that job. You wanted to do some other job. You couldn't get that job with the skill set that you had in hand, right? So there was a skill set mismatch, because of which you thought of going back to academic setting and acquire that skill. That's when you enrolled for this course. So you took CAT, you got into this course. So that's one bit. Now what happens is you're done with the easiest bit, which is getting into the course. You competed with few lakhs, you got through CAT, you got into the course. Now the little tougher bit is competing within the batch, which would be 50, 55 people, whatever your batch size is, and then getting out of it. And the toughest bit after that would be when you actually get into the corporate world, wherein you'll be competing not with just your batch, but two batches above you, two batches below you, and across all colleges in the globe, right? So currently you're competing with in a batch of 50 or competing with 49 others. But once you go out, there'll be jobs for which it's not just you, but people above you, people below you would also be applying. And product management is something wherein for 15 developers, 17 developers, 18 developers or engineers, you'll have one product manager. So product management jobs are far and few. So the reason I'm weaving all this is to give you a perspective how product management fits into the overall scheme of things. Now, I saw that you guys have a couple of courses around product management. So once you are done with the course, I'm not sure about the content of that, but let's assume it is something which gives you a basic understanding of how product management is done, what are the best practices, and some introduction to the agile world and things like that. So you feel, you know what, okay, I know the technical bit of or the product management skill set that's needed, I'm aware of it, so I'm good to get into product management. Now the challenge with that thought process is what you have acquired is the theoretical bit of the skill, right? So you didn't have the skill, you enrolled into the course, you got into the school guys taught you something, you acquired the theoretical skill. The world is not going to go gaga saying that, okay, next batch from IIT Kanpur is out and there are 50 bright students, so let me roll out the red carpet and hire them and make them an offer and give them a role in product management. Because what you have acquired is theoretical skill. They would still want to see, okay, what practical skills, how do you implement those skills in the real life? That's basically what demonstrates, okay, this guy is someone who has understood this, and this guy is someone who can actually think like a product manager. Okay, so first bit was domain knowledge. Second bit was understanding the product management skill that can be either acquired through doing things like CSPO or going through. There's enough material on web on sites like Product Monk, Product Focus, SVPG, which is Silicon Valley Product Group, and Product Hood. So there are tons of sites wherein you can actually go and learn about product management. I'm not sure if your course, the two courses that you have already covers all those. If they don't, then probably you can go to these places and acquire the theoretical bit of the skill. Again, the practical bit would still be missing, right? So that's two skills knocked out. Now, third skill that's needed is soft skill. Now, as a product manager, there are three things that are very, very important. When I interview people, those are three things that matters the most to me. First is empathy. So when you're designing a product, you're designing something that is going to be used by someone else, right? So you need to be in a position to understand how the other person is going to react and what is that he or she is looking for. So unless you can empathize, you cannot create a product which basically meets the needs of the end user. So empathy is a very, very strong trait that's needed in a product manager. Once empathy bit is sorted, if you feel you are very empathetic and that's something you don't really have to bother about. Other thing that matters a lot is analytical skill. So typically, if you guys have made through this far, I believe you guys are good with the analytical skill bit. So that's not something that would be a concern. But again, for a product manager, and analytical skills are very, very important. And since I believe yours is a batch of all engineers, typically when I'm talking to a mix wherein I have folks from arts, I have folks from commerce, I need to make them understand that as a product manager, you need to be a good storyteller as well as a good number cruncher, because a story is something that gives you the conviction that, okay, this is something that has a future. So if you're a storyteller, you can actually go and then you can make a pitch, you can basically come up with the idea for the product. But unless you're a number cruncher, you cannot really control, right? So if you cannot measure, you cannot control. There's a very famous saying. And for measuring, you need to be someone who loves numbers. So there are tons of matrices that's product managers typically track on a daily basis, depending upon what kind of product they are managing. If it's a B2B product, the matrices are different. If it's a B2C product, the matrices are different. But as a product manager, you need to have an inclination to storytelling as well as to number crunching. Now, once that bit is solved, if you feel you have all those in you, another thing that's needed badly is people skill or influencing skill, because a product manager typically sits at the center of a larger ecosystem and you need to coordinate with everyone to get things done. So you need to be someone who's influential enough, who has people skill to make things happen. And in the typical corporate world, the influence doesn't come by other stuff, but it basically comes by the work that you deliver and obviously the soft skills that you bring to the table. So once you have sorted up, once you're sorted with the domain knowledge, once you're sorted with the product management stuff, once you have learned all those things, do go back and revisit how good or bad you are with the soft skills bit, because that's one thing that's very, very, very important. Even if somebody gives you a job in product management, you can start your career, but if you're lacking in one of these, gradually you'll realize this is not something that you're going to enjoy a lot in your career. So the third bit was around the soft skill bit. Again, I'll just rephrase what was that. One is people influencing skills, and the second one is analytical skill, and the third one is empathy, right? Lastly, the fourth skill that you need to become a product manager is organizational knowledge. Now, when I say organizational knowledge, that is very, very contextual, because every organization is different and you cannot gain organization specific knowledge before getting into an organization, right? So if you are being interviewed for a company which has one product and they have like 50 different product managers for that. So Microsoft Office, they have so many product managers, right? Vis-a-vis a B2C product wherein there are only two or three product managers. So depending upon what kind of product you are going to manage or going to be associated with, the way you handle that changes. So product management basic skills still remains same, but the way you are going to handle that changes. The level of maturity the product has, a product which is basically is in its infancy, has a different level of measurement, has a different level of evaluation, has a different level of criterias on which it is evaluated, rolled out to the world, and is measured, vis-a-vis a product which has been there for ages. And then that basically is another stuff that a product manager needs to factor in when they think of making a career. So when you're interviewing for an organization, let's assume it's Google who's coming in. You know, Google has been around for a while. Their product management practices well developed. The way they manage product is something that's a case study for the external world. When you're sitting for the interview, the way you're going to think about product management is very different vis-a-vis when you're appearing for product management for, let's assume, Misho or someone else, which is basically a newer organization, for that matter, Bounce or any startup, which is in the idea of, okay, you know what, let's try something, fail fast. If it works, perfect. Otherwise, we'll move forward. So the fourth bit, which is basically the organizational knowledge, is more to do with where does the organization stand in the overall maturity. And even within that, an organization can be very mature, but the product management stream can be very, very new. So you need to put that in perspective. Okay, this is something that I understand. This is a 50-year-old organization, but probably they just started getting into product. So their mindset is going to be very different. If it's a company which was into system integration services company and they're getting into product, their way of operating would be very different. So when you join the organization, you have to work with a set of people who are typically used to working in a SI model, wherein SI system integration companies like Infi, Wipro, Cognizant. So over there, people typically have a mindset, okay, this is a project that I need to do. These are the things that client has asked for. This is what I need to deliver. Vis-a-vis when you're working on a product, you think beyond one client because you need to roll out that product to potentially the entire world. So you would want to make sure, okay, the product should be capable enough in which, by which what I mean is, okay, if I have to roll it out to a client in Africa vis-a-vis a client in US, the level of maturity of the client is going to be different. So what is that I should be putting into my product architecture when I'm designing, saying that, okay, this is something that's going to be that's going to sound relevant to a guy in Africa, and what is that that's going to be sounding relevant to guy in US. You need to think about those things. Now, this is not something that you're going to do when you're designing a custom product that's basically coming from a client which has requested you for a bespoke development, right? So at a high level, product management is something wherein you need to wear multiple hats, you need to work with multiple sort of people, and this is how the key skills that I talked about are relevant in the overall product management stream of things. Now, if you guys have any questions, we can get into questions. If you guys want me to cover anything specific, we can talk about that. If you guys have any queries on my journey, my experience, we can do that. So this is something that I wanted to highlight to you guys in terms of what exactly is product management. How's how do you typically get into that? What are the skills that are needed? And then I'll cover a bit about my journey, but probably that would come as part of one of these questions that I'm going to answer. If it doesn't happen, then probably I'll talk about my journey. So if there are any questions, I can take that. Otherwise,
Yes, yes, sir.
go
I
ahead.
think that'd be best. So we have few questions. Shubham, can you please go ahead with your question?
Yes. Hello, this is Shubham Notiaria, sir.
Yeah, Shubham.
So I have a question regarding the skill set you said you look in for a product manager. So the how does one measure empathy in an interview? So that is what I wanted to know.
Very interesting. So yeah, for such things, you'll typically give the person scenarios. You'll keep throwing scenarios to the person, and then you see how he typically responds. And if you're someone who might feel, you know what, he's a guy who's more into cricket, and so whatever I feel you are, I'll probably give you scenarios which is more applicable to person who's not you. And then are you thinking from that guy's perspective, or are you thinking from what you are? Okay, you know, I'm someone who basically wants to do things immediately. I don't care if whether it's something that's going to last forever or not, or I'm someone who believes in taking its own time. So depending upon during the interaction, that's what we end up evaluating okay, what kind of person he is, what is typically his trait. Okay, if I have to put up this person in a context, I'll say, okay, this is someone who believes in getting things done as soon as possible. Probably longevity is not something that's his first priority. Immediate result is something that he focuses upon. He's someone who's more into doing things in a particular manner. He has been in this demography wherein he has been a privileged person who always had access to this. So he is someone who always had a smartphone, who all so then I'll think whether this guy can think from a feature phone owner perspective or not. From someone's perspective who don't have access to internet all the time. So if you have access to internet all the time, the way you would use internet with someone who has it only for 30 minutes, the usage is going to be different. So when you're designing the product, you'll say, okay, I don't want to have these 5 different steps, because the person can still do his job with first three. The remaining two are good to have. Probably I can ask it at a later stage, or I can let the person use it for first three logins without providing this information. In fourth and fifth login, I'll say, hey, you better be providing me this because this is something that's relevant. So depending upon what kind of person you are, typically I'll throw questions to evaluate, okay, this person is typically of this mindset, this background, this is how he has been all his life, that's the exposure he has. Let me see how he responds when I'm asking him to design a product which is not for him. So I'll probably say design an alarm clock for a blind guy. So you're not
Yes.
blind. Now, obviously, let's see how you're going to respond to that. So those are the situations people typically throw to get an idea, okay, how this person typically thinks through when is put into a situation that is not basically himself. Does that answer your query?
Yes, sir. Thanks a lot, sir.
Yeah.
Great. Apurv, you're next.
Yes, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah, Pur.
So you talked about skills, so it is an extension to Shubham's question. I wanted to know how important are technical skills or the technical knowledge. Like one, you mentioned obviously the domain knowledge is important,
Sure.
the management skills, but how important is having the technical skills when for a product manager? For example, if you mentioned if someone is entering into this field from commerce background or arts background, you would have to probably train them in certain kind of skill set. So that is what I wanted to.
Sure. So now that's a question wherein probably I'll refer back to my journey. Let me talk about my journey. So I graduated in 2003, and then I taught at IMS for a year. Then I joined Infi, worked with Infi as developer, was working with a bank named UBS in New York. I did that for close to 6 years. I was doing this, and I'm going to come back to your question. This would be a little longer story, okay? So I was in US during 2008, and I burned my fingers during the 2008 crisis. Okay, so I was there making money, and I was investing in the market. Came 2008, I lost a lot of money. I started reaching out to people for guidance, saying that, hey, you know what? I what do you think? How does the market operate? Where should I invest? What should I do? And things like that. That's when I realized a lot of the people that I was looking up to, they didn't really have, they were good at the things that they were doing. Probably they were not the best people to answer my queries around personal finance and investment and things like that. That's where my interest in personal finance originated. And then after that, I kept doing it for 2 years. I kept reading. Then I realized, hey, you know what? This is something that excites me more. So I want to get into finance. So I quit my job in US, came back to India, did my MBA. So during my MBA, I took all my courses in finance because I wanted to make a career in finance. During the placement, so towards the end of the third and fourth term, somewhere over there, I realized, okay, you know what? I don't want to do number crunching for rest of my life. So I decided not to sit in placement for any of the financial companies that came. And I said, okay, you know, this is not something that's going to help me. I want to do something else. So I thought, okay, probably let's make a career in consulting. I got into consulting. So I joined a company called Entity Data. Fortunately, they had business consulting division. I worked in consulting division for 6 years, kept traveling, set up their office, did account management, did product management, did multiple things. I went to Singapore, I set up their office, and then I got bored with the work. I came back. At that point of time, I was doing the account management for them. Came back to India. Then I thought, you know what, now I'm going to be in India. And at that point of time, I was keenly interested in getting into e-commerce. So I left Singapore because 2012-13 was the time when e-commerce was actually booming in India and they were hiring people. I was like, okay, now at this point of time, they cannot find people with relevant experience because the industry itself is new. So let me go back. So I came to India, kept trying. I couldn't get into any good e-commerce companies. I got some weird, shitty roles which I didn't like, so I never accepted that. Then I kept doing consulting work with entity, kept traveling and doing all that. Then I moved to Canada. I did account management, didn't like. Again, left Canada, came back to India. Then entity filed my L1A. They said you go to US and then you settle over there. I'd already lived in US for a long time, and at that point of time, I thought, you know what? No, this is not something I'm going to enjoy. So after getting my L1A stamp, I decided to resign. So I resigned and I joined a company called Ares Communication, which was into IoT. At that point of time, I was working in connected cars, connected vehicle, and I was managing an IoT asset tracking platform. So I did that for a little over 2.5 years. And that's when I finally, the opportunity knocked my door and I got an option in an e-commerce company. That was Drew. And I had a long dream from 2012-13 wherein I wanted to get into an e-commerce firm. I couldn't get in. So I thought, okay, let me take the plunge. I got into e-commerce. So I shifted the domain. I got into e-commerce. I did that for a year and then I realized, you know what? No, this is not something that I enjoy a lot. I'm better going back to the enterprise side of the world. I jumped back to enterprise. And that's when I joined Benambi. Now, your question was on the skill set. Why did I weave all this story? So if you see my journey, I started as a developer who had who knew technology, who himself did coding for 6 years. Then I was into consulting. Then I did account management. Then I got into product management. At the same time, I spent a lot of time in BFSI. I spent a lot of time in IoT. Then I got into e-commerce, and now I am doing retail analytics. So all this, if you see, have helped me in some shape, size, or form. So it's not that if you don't have technical knowledge, you cannot be a product manager. But for you to be someone who understands how a developer thinks, how an engineering manager thinks, how are they going to respond to this problem when you take it to them? It's always good to have an exposure in that stream. Since I had done that work for 6 years, it helped me immensely when I started working with these guys and I said, hey, you know what, this needs to be done. And when they'll talk about architecture, when they'll talk about, yeah, this is not going to be scalable, when they'll say, you know what, we should go this model, we should use this tech stack, it helped me. It's not that if I wouldn't have known this, I couldn't have been a product manager. Could still have been a product manager, but probably I would have been lesser effective. So my point to you, Apurva, is no, it's not something which is going to be a roadblock for you, but for sure, if you have it, it's going to help you in the long run. And the more number of hats that you wear over a period of time, the better you will be equipped when you get into the product management shoes. So if you see my journey, I kept changing roles, I kept changing domain, and I again take a step back. So to give you an idea, so in the product management space, what happens is there's a role called product owner, which is basically a technical role wherein a person who deals with engineering to get the requirement delivered, to get the requirement prioritized, or that's basically the terminology for the agile side of the world, a product owner. In the erstwhile world or in the waterfall or in the hybrid world, that guy is called technical product manager. Okay. So if you don't have the technology skills, probably you cannot be a good product owner. Okay. The other skill set that a product manager needs, or there's another kind of product manager that's called BPM, business product manager. Who's someone who understands the domain bit, who's someone who understands how to deal with client, who's someone who basically helps with the sales pitch, who's someone who goes and does the demo. So that's another person who is there in the entire mix of the thing. So there's a product owner who's little technical. Then there's a product manager who's not that technical, but who's more on the business side of it. Then there's a product marketeer. So that guy is someone who basically does the marketing of the product. So he's someone who basically creates collaterals. He's someone who goes to various trade shows. He'll do the demo. He'll go and he'll make the presentation on the product. He'll participate in the industry events and things like that. So for becoming a product marketer or a business product manager, even if you're not a technical guy, that works. There's another role that's called product designer. Now, product designer is someone who basically designs how the product is going to operate. So it's one thing when you say, okay, I'm designing an application for mobile banking. That's one thing. And there's another guy who comes into picture who says, okay, this is how it's going to operate. The guy is going to come online. You'll say, okay, enter your mobile number. I'll let you register based on that. There are 5 different things that are going to come. Then out of that, you will choose these two options, and this is going to happen. So that is what product designer does. And then comes a guy who's called product director, who basically manages all these guys and who's responsible for the PNL and anything and everything that happens with the product. So Pura, to answer your query, after such a long story, you can, if you don't have technical bit, you probably might not be a good product owner, but you can still be a good business product manager. You can be a product designer, you can be a product marketer, and in the future you can still become a product director. But if you have the technical knowledge, when you become a product director, the appreciation that you're going to have or the decisions that you're going to take would be far more informed and would be far more logical and convincing if you have the exposure to the technical bit. So does it answer your query? I know it was a very, very long answer, but I thought probably this would give you perspective.
No, sir, it definitely did answer the query.
Saurabh, I can't hear you. Saurabh, you're on mute.
Sorry, sir, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So there was a
Yeah, I can hear you.
follow-up question since you mentioned product owner. So I had a question like, do you think the role of product manager is being taken away to product owner? Because product owner, in a sense, they are kind of a mix of product manager and they look after business. I mean, if we mix business analyst and product managers, I'd probably I'm looking at a guy who's a product owner. And companies today are demanding more of technical expertise in terms with product managers and owners. So do you think there's a role, this role particularly product manager is getting lost somewhere in between?
No. So product owner is a agile specific role, and prior to, or the organizations who are still not using agile, they'll still have technical product manager or business product manager. So product owner for sure is someone who's desired to be in the current mix of thing in the organization when the organizations have started going the agile route. But the product owner is more inward focused. He works with the team which is basically doing the which is doing the development. He is more focused in making sure the requirements are prioritized, making sure the requirements are documented, making sure the requirements are explained in a manner that the engineering team can work. Whereas a product manager, in a true sense, is someone who's more outward focused. So the product manager would be someone who will be doing competition research. Okay, how's the market performing? How's my competition doing? What is that's happening in the industry in terms of trend? How's my product competing against others? What is that the ecosystem has wherein I should actually be present? Should I be actually integrating with these 5 other players in the ecosystem? Does it make sense for me to actually integrate backwards or forward? So things like that is being done by the product manager. So anything with, so if you have to put it in a more crude manner, things which are more strategic, things which are more outward focused goes into the product manager bucket. Things which are more inward focused are into the product owner bucket. And typically, as I said, I used a term called organizational knowledge during the initial skill that's needed for when I was talking about the 4 skills for product manager. So this is where it comes handy. So if you're getting interviewed for an organization which is like a very small organization with a very small product which has just been launched, probably you might have a role which is doing both product owner as well as product manager.
Right.
But if you're managing a product which is mature, which has been into the ecosystem for a long time, you'll have a well-defined product owner and you'll have a well-defined product manager. And the product manager would be the outward focused guy and the product owner would be inward focused guy. And in bigger organization, like at Dunnhumby, we have all the roles that I talked about. We have marketer, we have designer, we have product owner, we have product manager, we have product director, we have all that because it's a mature organization and our product is an enterprise product which is basically sold. So we don't go and sell to individuals like you and I. Our customer is typically an enterprise. It can be a retailer, it can be a CPG. So depending upon what kind of product it is, you will find this entire mix. You might find 1 or 2. You might find one person doing maybe more than one role, or you might find all of them present in some shape, size, or form. Does that answer your query?
Yes, sir. Harshit, you have the question, right? You can go next.
Hello, sir.
Hi, Arshad.
Yeah, hi, sir. So when we talk about product management, so we start with like what's the desire, then feasibility can be built in, and then finally, how can we make money? So for desirability, feasibility, and viability, different teams are involved. Like desirability, is consulting team or viability finance team. So
Mm-hmm.
each team have different thinking and different people. So as a product manager, how you bring them on the same page, like because they have different thinkings.
So, Harshit, you're talking in context of a B2B product or a B2C product?
So like you can take anything, a B2B or B2C
Okay.
also.
So because a new product or product, okay, I'll assume everything because it changes with the dynamics changes everything. So let's take an example of Cred. Are you guys using Cred? Anyone of you is using Cred?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
no? Okay,
Yes.
Yes.
perfect. Now, 5 years back, there was nothing like Cred. The world was still operating. And when Cred came, when Kunal Shah created that, no one actually knew that, okay, there's a need that is still not being met, right? And at that point of time, Kunal Shah raised a lot of money just at the seed round. At that point of time, all he had was story. He didn't have good enough numbers to go and say, right? So as I said, product management is a combination of storytelling and number crunching. I'm sure Kunal had numbers at that point of time to say, okay, how many people are there in India who have credit cards, who pay their bill and all. But at that point of time, it was a lot around storytelling. That, okay, you know what? In India, there's so many people. So again, I'll again take a step back. So I'll keep weaving stories to probably make it sound relevant. So one good thing that Cred does, if you see, so if you are starting a bakery, you will probably on day one what you'll do is you will say, hey, free sample, come and taste my pastry, and you'll hope that of all the people who are eating, probably 20, 30, 40% of them might like it and might come back. But that's not the most optimal way of reaching out to those people because a lot of them might not really be your customer. They just walked in because it was free, right? Now, when if you see Cred, what Cred does is it basically targets only top 1% of India. So if you have a credit score of more than 750, you're someone who's credit worthy. You're someone who has been paying his bill on time. You fall in a particular demography. So he has already checked out a lot of people who might just be noise, who might not be a potential customer. Now, once that is done, he came up with a mechanism wherein you get paid credit coins for the bill that you're paying. So you're still getting something. You feel, okay, I paid a bill of 50,000, so I got 50,000 coins. Now you have to redeem those coins to get a reward. So you're still letting go something from your kitty, which is basically credit coin, which never existed 3 years back, something that credit created. And now you see, okay, there's something called credit coin, and you are making a decision whether I should be letting go those credit coins to buy up to redeem it to get this particular tea, coffee, whatever that DTC product is, right? Now, when you're doing that, you are actually taking a decision and then you are letting go of something to use that product. Now, chances of you being serious about that product is much higher in this scenario vis-a-vis the previous scenario wherein all you had to do is you had to walk into that bakery, pick up the free pastry and walk out, right? In this case, you'll let go probably 10,000 coins. You'll redeem it for a free pastry, free dessert, whatever that is. Now, if you see what has happened over here is when Kunal would have initially thought this product, he would have been talking about the story, right? So on day one, he wouldn't have all these numbers, okay, that these many people would actually come back and these many people are there who would let go all these things. He had a very good story. Then obviously he had certain element of numbers in terms of, okay, how many credit card users are in India, how many of them are someone who make payment on time and things like that. Now, depending upon whom you are talking to, you keep shifting the gears between the storytelling and the number crunching. And that holds true for all the products. The reason I brought Cred up is Cred is something that's way too revolutionary. Nothing like that existed. And nothing like that was something that was actually known to people. And people thought, hey, you know what? Everyone thought, okay, I'm using credit card, so it's my duty to pay it. Nobody thought that I am entitled for a reward to pay my credit card bill on time. So he created a need out of something which probably none of us realized. When you're creating a product like that, it has to be a very, very strong story. When you're creating a product which is more of a me too or a product that already exists or something wherein the need is already well documented, the need is already known. You know, okay, there's a rocket that's needed to go to moon, there's a rocket that's needed to go to Mars. The need is very well documented. Now you go back and you say, okay, I'm going to reuse the rocket, what Elon Musk did, I'm going to reuse the rocket. So the cost is going to go down by 1/5, 1/4, whatever that number is. So depending upon what kind of product you are creating, either it's about storytelling, or it is about number crunching. And depending upon whom you are talking to, if you're talking to someone who's from finance, they'll buy story only to an extent. They are someone will still believe in numbers. They would want to see something which talks number. Vis-a-vis someone, if you're talking to the strategy team, obviously they love numbers, but then they'll still hear to the story bit as well. If you're a startup and you're going to make a pitch to an investor, they would want to hear the story as well as the numbers. So both of them are equally important, depending upon which phase you are in terms of product creation, in terms of what you are creating, if it's a blue ocean product or it's a red ocean product. Depending upon that, you juggle between the storytelling and the number bit. Does it answer your query?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Arun, Goel.
Hi, sir. Good evening.
Hi, Arun.
I was it is a follow-up question that Apoorv has asked you, and you were telling about technical skills. So, given that, like you were saying, in the starting of your career, you were a developer with Infosys. Like the technologies that the Infosys that was using that time and now, it is going to be different. But although the architecture and those things are going to remain the same, but still that is like technologies are evolving. So how that is is that going to help in that case also? This is the one thing. Another thing is like you said, you have shifted like from one role to another, and that helped you eventually getting into the product management. But my question is usually if we see if we are switching from one domain to another, like from one role to another, it is it is a kind of perceived as a risky move. And also the thing is you will be getting not a senior position if you are starting from a like grassroots level in that particular domain. So you won't be getting like that senior level role that you will be getting if you are working in the same domain. So what is your take on that?
Okay, so you've got two questions and both of them are equally exciting. Second one is something that I got that was asked in the previous discussion as well. Lucknow guys also asked it. So first one, if you see, Arun, fundamentals of software engineering, they remain the same. Like fundamentals of building construction still remain same. You still have to dig the I'm not a civil engineer, so I might not use the right term, but you'll still make pillars. Probably the concrete that's being used is changed. Probably the building material that's going to get used is going to change, but the fundamentals still remain same. You need to have probably ventilation that needs to be taken care of. You need to take care of sanitation. You need to take care of how the electricity supply has to go through and things like that. So that's basically the basics of designing a building. Similarly, basics of designing a software remain same. With time, what's happening is it's evolving, and we are not moving backwards, we're moving forward. So things that when we were coding way back in 2010, I stopped coding in 2010, the things that were possible and the things that were not possible, it's very different now. Things that were not possible at that point of time, a lot of them are possible now. So when I get into a technical discussion with my team, and when they say this needs to be done, that needs to be done, I still know, okay, this was something that used to be a challenge for me because these were the things which were not possible at that point of time, considering the technology limitations we had in hand. So there was nothing wherein, so okay, if you're using this database, you can only have these many number of records. You cannot really have unstructured data in this. So back in the days, I used to code. Unstructured data handling was not something that was being supported by many databases. But now when I go and talk to people and I say, okay, we are going to get this many terabytes of data, I still know, okay, the fundamentals of database management remain same. How data is massaged, how data is processed, that remains same. With time, actually it has become easier. So my fundamentals actually help me connect better with them. When they come back and say, hey, this is possible, this is not possible, I'm in a position to understand because I got my hands dirty way back in early days of my career doing the similar thing. So technology will keep evolving. It's only going to get better. So it would be easier. What would happen is probably you might not know that, okay, even this is something that can be done with technology now, vis-a-vis something, okay, no, this was something that was possible and it cannot be done now. That's not what happens. Whatever was possible, you keep building on top of that. So that's one bit. Second question is equally interesting. So there's one thing which says there are three things that comes with a job: a location, a role, and a salary. Very rarely, and this is something that my dad said to me, and in the early days I didn't realize, but over a period of time I started realizing, very rarely you'll find all the three that would work for you. So if you want to make a switch and you're someone who has never done sales, you want to get into sales, probably you'll take a hit in the salary. If you're someone who's from northern part of India, but you are looking for a role that's coming in southern part of India, they're willing to offer you that. You have to compromise on the location. Or if you want to switch into a altogether very new, you want to get into marketing, you have never done that, probably you have to take a hit in the role. Probably you have to start at a little junior level. And I've done all of that. So let me tell you my journey. I'll again go back to the version that I told during Apur's question. So 2012, I left Singapore. I came back because I was not liking the work that I was doing. 2014, I left Canada and I came back because I was not liking the work that I was doing. 2017, I left my L1A and I got it stamped, but I didn't go because I was not excited to do the same work after relocating to US. So I had to take decisions which at that point of time sounded little irrational. Why would you let go your Singapore? Why would you let go Canada? Why would you let go L1A wherein you could technically get green card in 6 months? But I did that because in the larger scheme of things that I had in mind for myself, they were not fitting in. Because if I would have stayed back in Singapore, the organization that sent me over there, they sent me for a particular role. I would have been doing that only. Till the time I would have got a permanent residency, I couldn't have switched. I would have stayed with them doing the same role. That I would have wasted 2, 3, 4 years of my career doing something which probably I wasn't enjoying. Similarly for Canada, I went there, I came back because I didn't enjoy that work. So at times you have to take decisions which might not really sound very logical. People still make, so a lot many friends made fun of me saying that you're idiot, you're letting go your L1A. Why are you letting go your L1A, go to US and then you can switch from there? I'm like, I can go, but I don't know whether my organization is going to initiate my green card or day one. What if it takes 2 years for them to actually initiate the process? I don't want to do this work for next 2 years. I'm done with consulting. I want to move out of it. So I took a hit over there in terms of location. I currently put up in Gurgaon, and the job that I took in IoT was in Noida. So I had to commute for 3 hours on a daily basis. Daily, I used to drive for 3 hours to go to Noida. And my theory was, okay, Noida is closer to Gurgaon than US is. But then US, I would have gone once. Noida, I used to go daily, right? So that's a different story. But at that point of time, there were a lot many people who made fun of my decision, saying that this guy is an idiot. Despite getting L1A stamped, he's not traveling. So you'll have situations wherein you'll have to take a decision which at that point of time might sound like taking a step back, but let me assure, I did all this. Now, when I got the current role with dunnhumby, again, so it's a new domain for me. I've never worked in retail analytics. I've never worked in analytics per se. I've used analytics. I had used analytics during my IoT days. I had used analytics during my Droom days. But pure play managing an analytics platform, that too for a retail customer, was something very, very new. But over a period of time, there were two things which I feel worked for me. They realized, okay, the guy has actually switched so many roles and he has switched so many domains. So if we throw this opportunity to him or this challenge to him, probably he'll be able to do it because he has done that in the past at multiple levels, right? So there'll be people who will understand and who will appreciate that, okay, this is someone who doesn't want to be in the same status quo doing the same thing for the rest of his life. He might be comfortable with changes. So if you want to do sales, but your profile is currently product management, talk to people, figure out a way, reach out to people and say, hey, I want to get into this. You have a good tag along with you. You'll still say, okay, you know what, the guy is from IIT, so bande mein kuch to hoga. And that helps me as well. They'll say, okay, IIM ka banda hai, kuch to hoga yaar isme, jo aisi baatein kar raha hai. So when you go and say someone ki yaar mere ko sales karna, I want to get into sales, or when I said I'm done with this, I don't want to do consulting, I want to get into account management. So obviously first reaction is why? Kya ho gaya bhai tujhe? And then I'll say, nahi yaar, I've done this, I want to see this. You talk to your manager, you explain them what your rationale is, and then they say, okay, this guy, when he was doing this work, he was good at his work, and now he's a strong-headed guy. He has thought this, he wants to explore. Let's give him this opportunity. And then at the same time, you are open to take a step back. You might be reporting to a guy who's your peer or might be a bit junior to you. You're open to relocating to a different location. You have to be open to those things. So when they see the guy has hunger to do all this, things will fall in place. Now, when I'm playing this role, all the roles that I've played in the past, I've done sales as well for a while, but that was a very small stint. all this helps me a lot when I sit and I talk to those guys. When I'm talking to a sales guy, I know, okay, this is what is going in his mind. So when I'm talking to him, I typically channelize my conversation in the direction that he would like to hear. He would want to know, okay, what it means for my client, where's the number, where's the money going to come from, can I give him a free pilot, things like that. I wouldn't have understood all those things if I wouldn't have been in the other person's shoes at some point of time. And I realize this when I see my peers, when they talk to those folks, then when I do, that's where I can see a connect because I've been in the other person's shoe. So if you can play multiple roles before you find the one that you want to do. So I played so many roles before. So before deciding into product that okay, product management is something I'm enjoying, I played multiple roles, and I'm really proud of that. Over a period of time, obviously there was time when I took a hit in the salary because I wanted to try a new role, but gradually money follows. And once you fall in place, you won't have to bother about money. Money will chase you. You will not chase money. So that happens. And in the early years, when you don't have that much dependency on you, you might not have dependence. You might not have so many commitments in terms of home loan and other loans. You can take all the more risk in life. So take the risk because you only have one life here. You cannot be doing things. I'm telling you, I was very happy doing consulting. I was traveling all the time and all that. But at a certain point of time, I realized no, I've stopped enjoying it. There's a fixed framework that I have to. I go to a new client. They tell me similar type of story with different numbers. I use a similar framework. At the end of 1.5 months, I give a similar report, which looks a little different, but the logo is different. I analyze pretty much same set of numbers. I give some pretty much same recommendation. I got bored, and there was no way I could have done it for rest of my life for sure. Similar thing, similar reckoning happened to me when I took all courses on finance, and then I realized I cannot do number crunching for living. It's good that I know this, but if I have to do it day in day out, probably I'm not the one who can do it. When I did sales for a while, I realized I cannot wine and dine with idiots. I cannot laugh at their jokes when I'm not enjoying it. If you are in sales, your client is your god. Whatever shit he says, you have to laugh at that. I realize I don't have that trait. They can figure out from my face, hey, this guy, I don't have poker face. It comes on my face that okay, I'm not appreciating their joke. I'm not the right fit for that. And being on the other side, I always like, you know what the sales role is pretty good. Yeah, they keep traveling, they keep hanging out with folks at cool places. It's a nice life. I want to do it. I did it. I realized it's not for me. So there's no harm in trying things, try things. And then if you're failing, it's good. At least there's one thing that is out of your list. You won't regret towards the later stage of your career. Yeah, I would have been a good sales guy. Now I know I would have never been a good sales guy. I'm pretty clear on that bit. I'm pretty clear that okay, I couldn't have done consulting for all my life. There's so many things that I've realized because I did that. Some I did for shorter duration, some I did for longer duration, but over a period of time I did and I concluded that's not what makes me happy. Since you guys are going to get out of school now, keep experimenting with roles. If there's certain element of decent in terms of what you're doing, if it's not keeping you happy, probably try the other thing as well. Look around, see what others are doing, and see can you get into that. If there's someone who's willing to offer you that role, even if it is at a lesser salary, take that because there'll be one role for sure that you would really enjoy. And once you hit that, money will chase you like anything. You don't have to bother. People will chase you, organizations will chase you, money will chase you. And you will create your own niche wherein people will know, okay, Arun is a guy who's good at this. That can be sales, that can be consulting, that can be product management, account management, pre-sales, marketing, anything. You will create your niche, people will know you, and then money will follow and jobs will follow. Everything else will follow. But till then, see, I'm a slow learner. By all means, I took 7 8 years to realize, for 6 years to realize that okay, I should move from technology. Then another 5 years to realize, okay, no, I don't enjoy any of this. I should get into product management. I hope you guys are fast learner than I am. Figure out what your niche is and then move to that.
Thank you
Does
so
that answer your query?
much.
I
Yes,
know.
sir. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll take the next question. Siddharth.
Good evening, sir.
Hi, Siddharth.
Yeah. So my question is around the B2C landscape. Do you
Sure.
think product strategy is an everlasting process, or how long do you think a product manager should stick with a particular strategy, and what are the parameters on deciding it is time to change the strategy around your product?
Okay. So Siddharth, there's a very famous thing. A good product is one that has never finished building. So you always have something to add to the product. If it's a like Google search, it is still evolving. The primary purpose that it used to do was search. They're still investing on that. They're still evolving. Now, going back to your query, there are two types of product. Typically, they're called blue ocean product and red ocean product. Have you guys heard about that? Blue ocean strategy, red ocean strategy? Okay. So, assuming you all know, just in case if somebody doesn't know, red ocean is something wherein you're creating a Me Too product where there's a lot of competition. And blue ocean is something like Cred. Cred created something out of nowhere. Nobody thought of that product. So, it was a blue ocean. When they came up in the first version, vis-a-vis what they are now, they have evolved a lot, right? Now, with every product, if it's a Me Too product, then your strategy won't change that often because there are others who have walked that path. You pretty much know, okay, you know what, I first end up creating this, then I end up basically integrating with others in the ecosystem. Then typically, this is what I augment into my product. This is typically how my product journey is going to look like. That doesn't mean that the product strategy is not something that you're going to keep revisiting often. You'll still do. But if you're creating something which is a blue ocean product, in that case, you go back to drawing board more often than when you are doing the red ocean because this is altogether new thing. You don't know what lies ahead. Would there be an acceptance of your product? What is that the customer wants? You see any organization, Snapdeal for that matter, they actually revisit their business model thrice, right? They started with something like social, the coupons of the world, and then the deals, and then the inventory model and all that. So people keep visiting their strategy, their business model, and their product strategy, depending upon the landscape that they are operating in. And if it's a blue ocean, obviously you might end up visiting more often. If it's a red ocean, and if it's hyper competitive, and if it is something which is easy to get in. So if you're creating, let's assume you're opening a restaurant, not a IT product per se, but you're still offering a product. You're selling parathas for that matter. Now, food is something that is easiest to get in. Any guy who knows how to cook can technically be your competition next day. वो बाजू में एक दुकान खोल के बैठ सकता है, right? So it's easiest to get in. Now, vis-a-vis a CRM product or an ERP product, SAP, Oracle, and all those level of ERP, it's not something that anyone can create overnight and become your competition next day. So over there, the competition is much lesser. Their product roadmaps are much longer. They talk into years. Okay, next year we are going to do this. 2 years down the line, we are going to do that. Whereas a product which is basically hyper competitive, a product wherein there are 20 more players who are doing something similar, like the wallets for that matter. All of them kept revisiting their strategy on a quarterly basis. At some point of time, they'll be giving you points for doing recharge. Someone was giving you cash back. Someone said, based on this, I'm actually going to give you loan. So they move to credit and things like that. So depending upon what kind of product you're managing or creating, how much is the competition? How much is the entry barrier for that product? Is it something that people can get in very next day? Two guys who know coding, who are nerds, they say, okay, I can code and I can roll out a mobile app, which basically becomes a competition. Then that's it. Then you have to go to drawing board more often. With something that requires 5 years to build. So this is how the product strategy is handled depending upon it's a B2B product, B2C product, or B2B2C product. The product maturity, barriers to entry, cost, and various other parameters. With all that said, as I said in the beginning, a good product is one that is never finished building. So you keep building your product, you keep augmenting for that, you keep going back to drawing board, you keep visiting your product strategy.
Anupam?
Yeah, hi, good evening, sir.
Hi, Anupam. Good evening.
So my question is related to what successful product managers basically do, right? So suppose I'm a product manager, so I'm learning about customer insights on a product A, say. I'm working with payments in a product B, I'm talking about transactions, say, in a product C, and I'm basically analyzing growth prospects of a product D. So in a way, I'm basically covering all the aspects of a product's life cycle, right? But I'm doing it from multiple sources. So is it good to start with a product from day zero and stick with it during its entire building phase and remain with it after launch and face the entire thing, or is it okay to hop around products and learn different aspects from different products? What would be good in the long run in terms of growth aspects as a product manager?
Okay, so see, the best thing is if you create something ground up and you take it through all the phases of product life cycle. Because if you are getting into a product at inception stage or idea stage, The set of activities you do is different. The skill set that is needed is different. The learnings that you have is different. Vis-a-vis, when you get into a product which is in development stage, the activities that you do, the skill set that's needed is different, and the learnings that you have is different. Vis-a-vis a product that is rolled out in the market, vis-a-vis a product that is basically in the sunset stage. So typically these are the four key stages: ideation stage, development stage, product is rolled out, it's making money, and then again this can be further sliced and diced wherein the product is launched out to the early enthusiasts, or product has reached that threshold wherein it can be rolled out to the world. But to keep it, for me to answer it for you, I would say out of the four things, if you can do something end to end, the amount of learning that you're going to have would be immense. But that's not something that you can do parallelly. That happens sequentially, because when you're ideating a product, you cannot be thinking about the sunsetting stage challenges, right? Yes, you still have not created the product. Why would you bother about the sunsetting stage challenges? So if you're getting a chance to learn about other things as well, that's fine. But owning a product through the entire life cycle, the kind of learning it gives, there's no match to that. So if I'm given a choice, I would want to do one product end to end rather than doing four products at four different stages. Does that answer your query?
Yeah, very much, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Vaibhav, you are next.
Hello, sir. Good evening.
Hi, Weber. Good evening.
So, sir, in the Indian landscape context, where the products are going head to head with other products in the market, so there is some kind of trade-off always between the quality and the speed that we see. So, like basically, given your eclectic experiential backing from the offshore landscape that you are from, can you tell us how this trade-off generally percolates into the product roadmap, and how this trade-off is generally managed? Specifically speaking, in the B2B domain, because in the B2C, what we can always see is that your customer is a little price sensitive. In the B2B domain, we kind of see that your businesses, they would like to maintain a relationship for a longer period of time. So in that perspective, I wanted to know.
Okay. So B2B and B2C, the biggest challenges, one of the key challenges is B2B, generally users are not the one who get to choose a product. So there are multiple people who are involved in choosing. So there'll be a finance guy, there'll be an evaluation team, there'll be RFP that would happen, there'll be a technical analysis that would happen in terms of which one is good and bad. So the end users are generally not involved. I won't say all the time, but generally they are not the only ones who are evaluating a product. So when they are thrown a product, they typically end up using it, whether willingly or unwillingly. Whereas B2C, when you decide what you want to use, there are 5 apps which basically lets you read news. It's your choice where do you want to go and read, whichever interface you like, or whichever core content you like, whomsoever's content you like, you can go and do that. Now, going back to your question, whether it's speed or the value, it was speed versus value, right? Or speed versus feature. What was that?
Yeah, it was speed versus quality.
Okay, quality. So again, it goes back to the red ocean and blue ocean product. So when we are designing a product, what we see is, okay, if I'm giving this product to someone for the first time, vis-a-vis this is a product that they have been using in the past, but not from me, but from competition. So if they have been using a similar product for last 6 years, and I go and I take, hey, you know what, now here's my product, I'm giving you for 30% discount. But when you try using, probably 50% of the things are not going to work. For sure, you're going to get doomed, right? So depending upon the kind of product you are creating, if it's a blue ocean product, like CRED for that matter, if you see how in the early days when you would burn CRED coins to get the cash reward, it was such a tedious task. When you would drag it down, there was a bucket under which you had to drag it. More often than not, it won't fall in over there. So you keep trying, you keep dragging. At one point of time, it will actually get into that bucket. So box hota tha, uske andar jata hi nahi tha. But I had no other choice. There was no other place wherein I could go and burn my CRED coins. So whether I like it or not, I still had to use it. And that was something CRED very well knew. That first thing that I need to give this guy is basically coins to burn for the credit card payment that he is making. That's the first thing. That's the biggest anchor. Now over a period of time, obviously, once the guy has got all those things, other things comes into picture when the goodness is taken for granted after 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, right? When you say, okay, this is default behavior. After that, you say, okay, yaar, ye to coin to milna hi tha mujhe. Now what next? Now you would want, okay, coin is good, but when I go and burn it, there's so much friction. That was not the first thing that came to your mind. First thing that came to my mind was, okay, I'm getting 50,000 points, sorry, 50,000 coins for paying 50,000 rupee credit card bill. And okay, I need to drag it quickly. I'm not doing it correctly. That's okay. I'll still get some reward. So at that point of time, when it was a blue ocean product, wherein I had no option to go anywhere else, what mattered to me was, okay, a high level functionality is present. Now, when I'm moving to something else, now talk about current scenario. You have Zoom, you have Google Meet, you have Microsoft Team. Someone doesn't, for that matter, even for the video calls, that let's talk about a B2C product. In WhatsApp call, you could only have 4 people in a video call till a long time back, and Google Meet had, I believe, more than 10 or something. So people had a choice. Okay, Google Duo, sorry. So if I have a big gang that I generally hang out with, I'm not going to use WhatsApp because there's a restriction of 4. Now, from WhatsApp perspective, when they were launching it, should they have waited till the time they could roll it out for 8 people, or should they have launched it for 4? Because not everyone gets more than 4 people on a call all the time, right? So they were still solving a lot of use cases wherein people can make phone calls, video calls to their family, to their loved one. They can still talk, but not all the features were there. Initially, even the quality was a challenge. That's why they would typically ask, okay, rate this. How was your call quality? 1 star, 2 star, 5 star, and you'll keep giving the ratings, and then they'll say, okay, the rating was not good. Probably this is something that was not working, right? Similarly, if you go to Ubers and Olas of the world, they ask you to rate the ride because they want to see, okay, what is that that's working? What is that that's not working? So coming back to the question, if it is something which is a blue ocean product, you can be a bit comfortable in terms of launching with something that works with few glitches, that's fine. But if it's a red ocean product, more so when if you're being a replacement, then people are not going to pardon you for the glitches, for the nuances, for the issues that you have in your product. It has to be something which has to have a differentiator on top of the hygiene that is already considered for that product in the industry. So if it's a mobile wallet, if you want to launch a mobile wallet today, you would know, okay, UPI integration needs to be there. You should be able to recharge your mobile phone. You should be in a position to make the postpaid bill payment. You should be able to actually get few coupons. You should be able to buy a few deals. If you're launching just with this, there was a company called Oxygen at some point of time, right? They had few things, but then gradually, if you see in the larger scheme of things, they had very few offerings. So depending upon which kind of product you are creating, how your competitive landscape looks like, you have to take a decision between the two. Does that answer your query, Baba?
Sure, sir. Sure, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we'll take last 2 questions if it's okay, and then we can conclude the session.
Sure, not a problem here. Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so Apoorv, you have a question, right?
So you talked about being in retail analytics, like this is your current role, right? So I'm audible?
Yeah. Yes, you are.
Can you throw some light? Can you throw some light on this role of that you're doing in retail analytics? Like what challenges you face, or what kind of decisions you have to make, the thought process you are in, or the tools and techniques that you are using?
Okay, so your question is more for the role or more for me as an individual considering my background?
Role, sir, on the role.
Okay, so typically, I'm not sure if you, like, do you know what Danambi does?
Not clearly, sir.
Not a problem. So Danambi, it's world's first customer data science platform. It's around 30-year-old company. And it was started by a mathematician who basically did a project with Tesco, and he basically went back to Tesco and said, hey, you know what, depending upon the mathematical models, these are the things that I can predict for your clients. And based on that, he made a presentation to the Tesco management, and he said, okay, you know what, now I know your clients are going to buy these things, because based on their past buying history, this is a pattern. So if you see your buying pattern itself, there might be 20, 50 different things that you might be buying. Your buying frequency might differ, right? You might be buying bread, you might be buying eggs, you might be buying milk, atta, and all that stuff. Frequency might change. You might buy something once in a month, you might buy something on a daily basis, things like that. But pretty much the spectrum of things that you buy would be little personalized to you. And what you are buying, probably Harshit is not going to buy the same set of things. But when I'm actually creating a promotion, I'll say, hey, $5 off on Pepsi. I know Apurva buys Pepsi, Harshit doesn't. But if I'm sending a mail to both of you, or if I'm sending a communication to both of you, it can be either over email or through, it can be a physical mail that comes to you. When I say physical mail, a coupon booklet, or it can be an ad that you are seeing. The relevancy or the impact of that ad would be different for two of you, because you are someone who buys this product, the other one doesn't. Now, when I'm doing an advertisement, I gave the example of Cred, right? I gave the sample to everyone. I'm hoping that, okay, all those who are eating my pastry, they'll come back. But not all of them were my relevant customers. Similarly, in this case, everyone is unique. But in the erstwhile days, what used to happen was I'll throw one ad and I'll send it to everyone, and I'll hope, okay, Apurv ne nahi liya, Harshit to shayad le lega. Okay, I've done it, I've sent it to 100, probably 5% will buy. But that's not a most optimal way of doing it, right? So what we do is we personalize the experience of each individual based on what your shopping pattern is, based on the things that you buy. So when you go online, oh, I know, okay, Apurva has come. These are the 50 typical things that he is going to buy. That's one. Once you're done shopping, probably you bought only 12 of those. I'll say, hey, Apurva, this is something that you typically buy. It's not available. What happened to those remaining 38? Like if you shop at Big Basket, at the last page at checkout, they say, have you forgotten or would you like to add? That's basically based on your buying pattern, wherein they say, okay, this guy typically buys it, but for some reason he hasn't bought this. Then you have someone who buys one particular brand of stuff. So you are a Coca-Cola loyalist. I'm Pepsi. I want to reach out to you. Now, for me to reach out to you, I need to know what is the best time to reach out so that you actually buy it. So I know, okay, Apurva typically buys probably 30 bottles of Pepsi every month, and he does the shopping in first week of the month. Now, this is the last week of the month. I'm hoping you have pretty much exhausted all your Coca-Cola cans. Now you're going to go to the shop, supermarket again to buy a cola. Now, at that point of time, if I reach out to you and I give you a coupon for Pepsi, chances of you redeeming that is very high vis-a-vis if I give you something immediately after you bought those 30 cans, right? So that's another bit where retail analytics comes into picture. So I'm just talking at 30,000 feet level. There's much more than beyond this that we do. So there's personalized offer, there's digital recommender, there's relevant sponsored search and things like that. So I'm not going to get into that bit of that. But at retail data analytics, when we do that, it's all about profiling a customer so as to come up with a recommendation which is very, very targeted to him or her, so that when the enterprise, when I say enterprise, it would be either a retailer or the CPG, when they are spending their money, they know the customer who's going to come to them is going to give them better ROI for the marketing spend, better ROI for the acquisition spend. So that's what the product does at a 30,000 feet level. Obviously, if you keep double clicking, with every click, you'll learn more. With every click, I can talk about more things that my product does, with more things that I've built into my product, and with more things that we want to build into our product. So considering the paucity of time, like this is where I'm restricting my response. If you have something very specific, feel free to ask. We can connect offline. I can talk about my product in detail. But like, is it something that answers your query? I know this is not end to end, but at a high level, is it something that gives you the perspective?
Sure, sir. We can connect offline. I definitely have more questions, but we can connect offline. Sure, sir.
Sure, not a problem. Because I can see other faces as well, and they are like, okay, you know what, kya bore kar raha hai yaar?
Okay, sir, we'll take one last question. Amol,
sure.
Yeah. Hello, hi, sir.
Hi, Amol.
Sir, yeah. So if I'm building a product in the service of B2B, then so how do I know, or what are the metrics I can look at to know if my product is viable? Also, what should be the frequency of the market research or the consumer behavior I should do while creating my product in various stages of life, while expanding my product?
Okay. So Amol, is this a product that's a Blue Ocean product or a Red Ocean product? Like a competition already?
In the case of Blue Ocean, so I don't have any other competitor in the market.
If you don't have any other competitor, then you are the one who's going to define how the product is going to look like, right? And your question was, if I'm defining this product, what are the matrices that I'm going to track, right?
Right.
What was the other bit of that?
What should be the frequency of the market research or the consumer behavior I should be doing while expanding the product line?
Sure. So as I said, for a product manager, you have to have a good inclination towards number and a very good storytelling skills, right? So when you're creating a blue ocean product, it's your creative hat that comes into picture wherein you see, okay, there's a gap that exists, which probably a lot of the people have not realized till this point of time. In B2B space, that's little lesser, but that it does exist. Like if you see Postman, the IIT Kharagpur guys created Postman, right? And that's an awesome thing. So if you go and if you read about it, that's something that makes a developer's life pretty easy. But something like that was not existing earlier. It made the life easier for others. Was it that nobody thought about it? Probably few more guys would have thought about it. They didn't execute it that well. So when you're thinking about your product, so market research is something wherein you really spend good enough time to validate whether the idea that I'm going to invest upon, does it have a buyer, or does it have a visibility or a light at the end of the tunnel? Would there be anyone who will be willing to put some money into the table to buy it? So day one, you go to the table, you analyze all that. And then once you're done with that bit, you see, okay, this is based on my current understanding. This is how things look like. You end up putting few hypotheses. Okay, this is what my product is going to do. This is what my hypothesis is in next 1 month or in next 1 year. This 1 year is a long time for a product. You'll say, okay, next 1 quarter or in next 2 quarters, this is what I'm going to acquire. Once you have done this bit, then what you do next is you actually go back and see, okay, you know what, whatever use cases you identified and whatever scenarios you had in mind against which you define the matrix, you say, okay, these are the 10 things that I want to accomplish. For this, these are the measures. The measures can be different depending upon if it's a product which is to be used by someone on a daily basis. You would probably track the number of daily active user, the amount of time they're spending on your product, the number of users who complete the transaction end to end, the number of users who are actually logging in for the first time, and the users who are not coming back again. So depending upon what use case you're trying to solve, you'll first define. So there's something called a North Star. Like, you know what North Star is, right? North Star is something which the guys who used to go to ocean, they would typically look at to determine the direction. Okay, I have to go in this direction. This is where the north is. So that's what they would do. Now, for your product, you define a North Star saying that, okay, this is what my product has to do. And based on that, you define the metrics. Okay, for my product to be doing this, my product should basically be something wherein my user has to be, again, since I don't have a product in mind, I'm just thinking loud. Your North Star could be, I need to have my daily active user spending 30 minutes on my product. That can be, you can be basically a news site. You want your users to come and spend at least 30 minutes. So you'll start putting matrices around that saying, okay, how many people log in on a daily basis? How many of them actually spend 30 minutes? How many of them were spending 30 minutes earlier but have stopped doing it off late? How many of them actually do it on a weekend but not on weekday? At what point of time do they do more? But since you had B2B product in mind, I'll change the lever, I'll come to B2B, but I was giving you a context. So had it been a B2C product, which was more on the news side, these were the variables that you would have thought of. Coming back to a B2B product, again, if it is something which you are creating for which there is no competition per se, your sales cycle itself is going to be very different. To begin with, you have to give a lot of pilots per se. You'll say, okay, this is a free pilot, you go and you use. So you define your exit criteria, you define your success criteria with your customer saying that, okay, you do this and we'll come back and we'll interview you to basically understand your experience with the product. And that can be basically a daily interaction, that can be a weekly interaction, or that can be at the end of the pilot. But what you would do is you'll basically again define, okay, these are the 5 things that I want. If I've created a mobile app that basically helps a surveyor for an insurance company to do better survey of the vehicle. I'm just thinking loud. I'm sure there are various products that already exist. How many of the existing surveyors who were there actually ended up using it? How many of them used it for the second time? How many of them are the ones who basically come back to this on a daily basis? How many of them open it only once or twice? How many of them are the ones who have actually explored all the features. How many of them are there who basically have gone through the help section or FAQ section of that? So there are various bits to that. Once you analyze this, you figure out, okay, you know what, probably 80% of my users are not even going beyond the first page. So probably either my first page is not communicating what all lies ahead. You go back to the drawing board, you again recalibrate your experience, and you say, okay, probably I need to revisit my design and put it in a manner wherein everyone understands this is what lies on the second, third, fourth page. They should have enough they should have enough intrinsic motivation to actually go to the next pages. So those things are not going to happen automatically. For that, you keep analyzing various matrices, and depending upon what your North Star is, the metrics would change depending upon how you are selling your product. If it's a product which is currently in a free pilot, you basically change the metrics, because if someone is not putting money, their motivation of using it would be very different. With a product wherein people have paid, if they have paid and they're still not using, then that's all the more alarming for you. With a scenario wherein you're doing a free pilot and they're still not using. So it's a combination of multiple things that comes into picture depending upon what kind of product it is, where you are in the sales cycle, how mature the product is, how well the use case is understood. Is it something which is a disruptive product, or is it something which is not a disruptive, but it is something which is automating an existing piece of work? So there was something that was already being done, but it was bit semi-automated. Now what you're doing is basically making it automated. So probably people feel that, you know what, they're still not using it because they felt the semi-automated manner was more optimal or more efficient for them because they were more used to it. So things like that come into picture. Again, this is something which is very subjective to the product that you are creating, how mature the product is, where does it stand in terms of the sales cycle and things like that. So there's no one answer, but there are tons of variables that comes into picture while you are deciding your matrices. But obviously your North Star plays a very important role when you put together your matrix.
Right, sir. So that was very helpful. But like again, the question arises that what should be the level of the analysis I should do before launching a product, like in different paths while expanding. So like if I have built my company and then I have to expand like 4 to 5 more ways ahead. So how many times do I have to do the market research again? Like for even a small piece of work, do I have to do the market research, or is it fine there?
See, market research is something that's an ongoing activity, honestly. So the amount of time you spend in market research changes. The amount of time that you spend in market research while you are in ideation phase is much higher than the amount of time you spend in market research while your product is rolled out and it's basically improved over a period of time. Now, if you have already created your product and if you already have active users who are using your product, next thing that you should be looking into it, is it something that's basically part of an ecosystem? So if your product is doing a bit of a bigger piece of the puzzle, does it make sense for you to actually be augmenting all those things as well? If your user is doing first bit with you, but he still has to go to 4 different places to accomplish the remaining piece of the puzzle, probably he might not be that much motivated. He'll be like, okay, I only can accomplish 10% of my task by going to this guy. I probably should be doing, depending upon how much effort it takes, he might choose to do it the old fashioned way. So depending upon what you are doing, how many more things are to be done to accomplish the entire task, whatever work, whatever capability your product has, is it an end-to-end product or is it something that does a bit of it? If it does a bit of it, what all needs to be done beyond your product is something that you need to analyze. If it's an end-to-end product, then you need to understand, and if still there's not much acceptance, is it that people are not really understanding the value proposition that you have built together? If it's a B2B product, then obviously the sales cycle is longer. Probably you need to make sure that the people who are supposed to use it and the people who are supposed to sell it, they should understand. If you have a sales team, Homestar is doing sales, I'm sure there'll be someone who will be doing sales for you. It might be you, it might be someone else. They need to understand the value proposition of the product. They should be in a position to go and explain it equally convincingly the way you had it in your mind when you actually decided to build this product. They should understand, they should believe in the value proposition, and they should believe in the story that you had in your mind. They should have a mechanism to actually give them paid free pilots. They should have mechanism to showcase the customer how the product is used. So probably you can create free videos, you can give them demo links and things like that. That would do one bit wherein you can go back and validate the product that you have created. Is it not scaling because people don't understand what it brings to the table, or is it because there's something else which is better than what you have built, or is it something that actually was never needed? So you have to spend time with your users to understand, and the other stakeholders in the ecosystem, the sales team, the people who are talking to the client, to understand what is the feedback they are hearing on the ground. To the user who's using your product, okay, why are they liking or not liking it? To the people who are using your competition's product, or the people who are choosing to do it old-fashioned way, be it automated, be it semi-automated, be it competition's product. So you have to go and spend time with them. So a lot of product management is research. It can be competitive research, it can be market research, it can be your own product research, it can be user research, it can be anything. But that is something that you do on an ongoing basis. The amount of time you spend out of your day might change, but that's something that's more of an ongoing stuff. Does it help you at any extent?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. A lot. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Okay, so we like probably stop here. We just like to conclude this session, and I would like to thank you for taking out your time and helping us answer all our questions patiently. It was like really a very interactive session, and I hope you felt the same as well with us.
Sure.
So with that, sir, we'd like to conclude, and thank you again for being with us.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for having me. If you have any queries, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer your queries. And as I said, product management is something for which in India things are evolving. So you might find people who might give you different definitions or different perspective for different things. It's always good to hear everyone's perspective. There is no right or wrong way of doing things, more so for us, for something that is evolving. So reach out to other people, hear out their perspective, use the one that resonates with you. If my style resonates with you, go with mine. If someone else says something else which resonates more with you, go with what you believe in. Not necessarily whatever I'm saying is something that would make sense to you, because everyone has a different personality, have different experience, have different appetite for different things. So with that, I'll wish all the best to you guys. Do well in your career. If you need anything, feel free to reach out to me. I'm there on LinkedIn. Happy to answer your queries, and let's stay connected. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thanks a lot.
No problem. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.